We're now recording.
Half plus one.
Hey, Mike, we heard you.
Get 14.
Jennifer, 6.
Hi, can y'all hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
I'll go back on mute. Thanks.
Can you hear us? Cool.
Very well. Thank you. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. Something came up.
No worries.
Six.
Okay. Yeah, no, sorry, it's a little bit. Yeah, we're still refining some of those with our consultant.
There we go.
It helps us get a batch every week. Yeah. Moving forward. So.
I assume it's not like a Word format that I can just redline. Is it?
We can convert it to a Word. It's a PDF, so we just.
Okay.
Yeah, cool.
Good morning. Hey, how are you?
In person.
You're real.
I'm not a flat person. Not a flat Stanley.
Welcome.
Thanks.
See, warmer than I thought that'd be freezing down here.
You know, we can get it right. Right here, it's like 61 degrees. Down here, it's like 74 degrees,
Right.
78 degrees.
It keeps us on our toes again.
Yeah. That's probably the reason why Jennifer said it to not be here in person, because last time we froze her to death.
I know, right?
Let me see who else we have online. We're close to the quorum.
Asking Mike.
What a review we've got up there.
Keeps auto changing. Weird.
The club.
Yes, we have.
Commissioner Carpenter just emailed you saying there are password issues.
Okay.
Glad to know I'm not the only one that's online that has those problems.
Interesting. The password is always club, just FYI.
Okay.
And it's in the Outlook event as well.
I'm pretty sure I just put in Dallas today and got in,
But
but maybe not, but I'm pretty sure I did. I don't know.
yeah, fresh out the IT.
You came in as an attendee and I moved you over to a panel. If
Sorry
you
about
use the
that.
Dallas password, I can still move you.
Sorry. All right. Note for next time.
All good.
Like bigger bricks. Yeah. Try to screen share. That view won't let me go into grid, so we gotta use, yeah. Phone line is still stuck in the scripts. What's up? Is that Dan? Oh, cool. Awesome.
Did you email Commissioner Carpenter back?
I don't have the email.
That's strange. Okay. I'm forwarding it on to you.
Good morning. It's more like a hug. This is Wait. Of course, it's super.
Oh, yes.
Can you guys start over? You gave us more. Oh.
Great.
Sorry, guys.
No, we're having a couple of tech challenges, so.
Okay. Y'all see this okay?
Yes.
Oh, she's saying club doesn't work. Hey, Mike, Deborah's, Commissioner Carpenter's saying, okay, never mind. Says he has it.
So if it's not club, do we know what it is?
It is club, according to Michael King. He said she's wrong.
Yeah.
That's what the tech guy says.
Lowercase, uppercase.
Who's delivering that message?
I know. Keep in mind, check.
That was good.
If you wanna, y'all have her, I think her phone number's in her email if one of you wants to call her. You have good reception down here. I've got a couple bars if you need to use my phone.
It's lowercase Dallas or lowercase CLUP. Dallas is the password for the panelists. CLUP is the password for attendees.
Yeah, this is how we got the ransomware. It's just
Right.
specifically
Yeah.
everything.
We were just talking about.
Yeah.
We not learning? No. This is really laggy. It's about a minute ago.
You said it was about a minute.
Just make sure that, see, we move it. 1, 2, 3. Okay, not spot. Seconds, not bad. Still pretty good, yeah.
Great. All right, good morning, Commissioner Carpenter. Sorry about the tech issues. Can the folks online hear us in the room? Great. And Mr. King, are we recording?
I am recording.
Great. Good morning, everyone. It is 8:45 a.m. on June 13th, 2023. This is the Comprehensive Land Use Plan Committee, and we have a quorum, so I call this meeting to order. Mr. Price, can we start with a quick roll call?
Brent Rubin,
Here.
Deborah Carpenter.
Here.
Jasmine Anderson,
He'll be late.
Jerry Hawkins, Krista Nightingale.
Here.
Did I hear something?
I had her here.
I'm sorry, can you say here one more time, please?
Here.
Thank you. Linda McMahon,
Here.
Lynette Aguilar, Matt Houston, Peter Goldstein,
Here.
Roy Lopez, Daniel Barrett,
Here.
Jennifer Scripps,
Here.
Joe Cannon,
Here.
Colin Yarbrough.
Here.
All right.
Great. The first item on our agenda is the Forward Dallas Place Type Working Session. I have number 4 on my agenda, but I guess it's number 5.
Right, yeah, the fifth, workshop, yes.
Before we get into that, I see that we have some members of the public here. I don't see anyone signed up to speak online. Are either of you here to speak?
I did have just a question regarding the Forward Dallas land use map and the online portal. I know that
Can you state your name and address for the record?
Mark Ishmael, 2401 Bennett Avenue, apartment 3231. So yeah, about the online map, I know that there had been issues, I'm sure, with y'all's whole process regarding the ransomware attack. And I know I had spoke to Patrick about May not receiving an update to the online map. But I was wondering when the progress since the last version that was posted online, I think available in April, if like when that would be reflected, whether y'all haven't been able to make changes or able to access the website, or just what the situation was there.
Right, and I can repeat the question just so those online can hear it. Member from the public wanted to know on the online portal for the map, the social pinpoint, when the next update would be for that portal. I know we had some issues with IT security that's actually had delayed some of our publishing of information about 2 months. So the next update would be planned for the end of this month. And that's going to conclude everything that we've heard up to date.
Okay.
So instead of just having 2 smaller updates, we're going to just consolidate that.
And just as a follow-up question, does that mean there won't be a way to see any change? Like, if there have been changes to that second version of the map since then, will there be no way to comment on the work that's gone on since then prior to the?
No, so the same way that it's shown there now, where you kind of see what changed versus what's on there.
Oh, it'll be on there to collect comments?
Exactly, right.
Gotcha.
Great. All right, Mr. Gu, whenever you're ready.
All right, cool deal. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. This is our 5th place type workshop, and we're going to be focusing on the mixed use and commercial place types today. Those include basically the 3, I guess, neighborhood, medium, and the regional. And also we're going to delve into the city center urban core place type, which is a mixed use place type as well. So just going and recapping on what we've talked about the last few months. This is going to be the 5th, like I mentioned. I'm going to quickly touch base on what we talked about last time, which was on the residential. Those are being developed from staff and the consultant team based on the feedback that we received. And the idea is after we get the comments from these workshops and our discussions, we will work internally, create a more refined place type, send that to you all to review further, and then send that back to us by the end of the month so we can update the place type map like we mentioned earlier today. And have a quick recap before we even jump into this place type. I want to kind of just talk through scheduling briefly, just so everybody's on the same page. So like we mentioned, some issues with tech has delayed just publishing of the information. Within the project timeline, we're still on schedule, but in terms of getting the information onto the website, that will be end of this month, beginning of July, hopefully, for the public to see the kind of the 3rd iteration of the map. As that's happening, our team is also going to be working on writing the plan. So as we write the plan and kind of focus our efforts on that development of the document, there will be some iterations and updates through social media in terms of what we're doing and how we're doing it. We're still welcoming feedback from the community in terms of questions about Forward Dallas. But our efforts internally is going to be about just getting the plan written and developed for you all to review by July. All right. So with that, I'm going to quickly delve into our comments from 523. Again, that was the residential place types. Let me get my bearings here. All right, just to recap, we touched on actually rural residential, briefly, traditional residential, city residential, and those are the 4 that we looked at. So just a quick recap on the rural residential. I think we actually talked about this the day before, the meeting before. So I'm going to actually go to traditional And there are a few comments here. One was thinking about the mix of uses that exist in this particular place type. The multifamily, I think the way that it was defined and we identified it wasn't on this particular suite of land uses. That was added as a supporting use within this place type. Other feedback that we got, kind of think when we do add that particular type of use, think contextually, be sensitive to the way we write how that should be integrated into this particular place type, but still providing the opportunity for more types of housing to exist. Some parts of the city, specifically North Dallas, single family neighborhoods north of Singleton, they want to maintain their single family character. So it's important as we look at these mix of uses to still keep what the community would like to see as other types of housing is being introduced to accommodate the increased population that we'll be seeing in the next 20, 25 years. Things on the same. Oh, so as we look at other parts of the city that are less affluent, there is a fear that, you know, coding these with more land uses will kind of, you know, have that potential of having them be gentrified or losing their housing affordability. So just a note for staff to think about as we start to look at the suite of uses, to be cognizant about the effects that it has with the community. Equity is a huge piece of what we're looking at too. Think about how does these place types reflect equity within the city. There's a conversation about affordable housing, and it's important as we develop these place types. So again, as we look at equity in housing within all of these place types, it's important that we are trying to, one, ensure that all city residents can afford to live where they want to live, but also to providing an opportunity for different variety of housing in the city of Dallas. So I think that kind of general conversation about housing went through all the place types. Blended residential, again, this is the more has more mix of uses. It's still single family in character, but we kind of touched on certain different examples that exist in this particular place type. When we go into city residential, a few things that we looked at, the term urban city residential, you know, we're playing with what these terms could be. It's still fluid at this moment. So there might be certain districts, places in the city, or just in general, just an understanding of what that term means is going to be imperative that staff and the PM team works on making sure that the terms don't turn off people in terms of what they understand for these place types. There was a discussion about maybe thinking about low, mid, high in terms of the nomenclature. And that's something that we've mentioned to our consultant, and that might be reflected in the next few drafts that we present. The connectivity within these place types, that's a huge kind of item that we're looking at. That's actually a theme that we're connecting through these place types. So as we develop these place types, the actual full language is going to be a section about a theme connection section in terms of how are we using or how are we emphasizing, you know, TOD and connectivity within each place type. So we'll be sure to identify and write those out within each of those place types. So that's just a quick recap of what we talked about. Again, we're going to be redefining, tweaking, modifying, and adding more language for the CLUP to receive and look at, you know, either through PDFs, Word docs, etc. After and before these meetings, so you all have some work to do. Our team was a little bit behind in terms of sending you all what we sent you all last night, but hopefully we'll start to kind of churn these out a little bit quicker for your review. All right, so with that, let's just jump right into the first place that they're going to be looking at. So this is the neighborhood commercial mixed use district. So all of these places that we're looking at, excuse me, they are focused on commercial and mixed uses. So actually on the screen, I'm noticing it's really slow. I'm gonna do this pretty slowly. I'm gonna read out what this particular place type is. It's the least intense commercial / mixed use district. This one incorporates a mix of retail, commercial, office, and some residential building types. It's typically found or featured at intersections of major roads, along key corridors, And there are some options for small corner shops or small commercial complexes. The uses that exist here, the primary uses are lodging, multifamily, office, commercial, and the supporting uses are mixed use, open space, both public and private, public institutional, single family, detached and attached, and transportation. So, and this just shows a graphic representation of the types of imagery, the types of buildings that you would see in this place type. Schools, parks, neighborhood retail, religious buildings are also on the bottom shown as supporting uses. So just want to get a quick visual representation of what this place type would look like. And then
Sorry,
lastly,
can you zoom in on these images?
oh, okay,
Because
good. Is it a little blurry?
It's just
Okay.
incredibly small.
All right. So this is an example of a retail.
And then for this image here, are you trying to capture just like the streetscape, or when you say retail, so that's what Greenville Avenue, so I know that to be your 1 to 2 story, shop fronts, but
Right.
then there's also other mixed use developments where you might have 3 or 4 stories.
Right.
So I guess what is that image trying to
So
convey?
I guess connotating the type, the feel, the type of interaction that people would have with the retail establishment. It could be this particular type, but also too there are other suites of retail that we also see in here too. So this is not just the only version of it, just kind of more of a getting a picture type of feel.
Yeah, part of it is to, when we talk about place types in an abstract term, people start to floating around when you start to try to ground it in a place. So like you said, when you say Lower Greenville, you're like, oh, all right, that puts you in that place, and you say, I can kind of feel what it's like to be in that place because I know that place. So sometimes it's just trying to put you in there.
I think that's a good question too. As we look at these images, if they don't seem like they should fit in each of these place types, or there should be another example that comes to mind, that's what we want to talk about too as well, as we start to unpack what these are.
So do you lump retail and restaurant together?
Yes. Right. Next image, just one of lodging. That to show up. The third is going to be focused on neighborhood office. It's just an example of building type that would exist there too. I can also go into the secondary uses just to see what those look like. We're at schools, parks and open space. That's really slow, sorry. Single family detached. We get neighborhood retail that includes restaurants and other types of commercial establishments, religious buildings, single family attached.
What's the difference between retail and neighborhood retail?
What it delve into.
So part of it is trying to get sometimes that scale, and as we're still trying to build it. So the neighborhood retail kind of comes out of that, is kind of a holdover from the the blended and the city residential place type, where you're saying that you can't have retail there, but it's not a big shopping center. It's more neighborhood retail. So like that example, which I believe is a garden cafe, it's an example of neighborhood retail that's located within a residential place type. So you can have it's a retail center, or sometimes you might have retail that's a little bit more mixed in with that, a little bit more residential component.
Yeah, I would just say we probably need to make a differentiating between what is retail versus the secondary, just for the general public as we're starting to dive into.
I know you lump retail and restaurants together, but they're not treated the same and there's not also the same desirability for them in the neighborhood, like Lower Greenville in some cases for residential. So I don't know whether it should be broken out or.
Can you elaborate on that? I'm kind of curious with your perspective on how they're treated differently and the differences that you see and how they're treated differently.
Because of the hours usually. I mean, they're usually longer, later hours. And you know, particularly the debate that had been on Lower Greenville was the parking in the neighborhoods and drunken patrons, et cetera.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it just depends. If it's, you know, McDonald's, that's one thing, but if it's a bar, restaurant, it's another.
We spent many hours at the Plan Commission dealing with the Garden Cafe alcohol SUPs, so,
I'm sure.
among other things. It's not
Yeah, there's no
unique.
doubt about that. I mean, we hear about that all the time.
Yeah, and what I would say to that, Mr. McMahon, is much like as Lawrence talked about, how multifamily can be part of a place type, but it's got to be context sensitive.
Right.
I think that's what we can speak to when we talk about retail and restaurants. We say, yes, it's allowed, but it's got to be context sensitive to that.
Okay. Good, thank you.
I'm gonna try to. Let me know if y'all can read that, okay? If not, I can zoom into a particular section or just keep the imagery for conversation purposes.
So if you can zoom in.
Yeah, if you want to look at might be.
That's awesome.
Is it easier to just log in?
That's what I did.
Okay, everybody's logged in. So this is
Okay.
basically useless, is what I'm hearing.
Probably.
WebEx is actually.
Thank you, Mr.
On
It's-
page.
it's Facebook, okay, okay.
Yeah.
So I'll wait for you all to log, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
For City Hall Internet. Oh, that's right, I'm sorry, you all actually can't see what I'm sharing, that's actually,
Just logged in, yeah.
so if you all,
They just logged in on their phone.
okay, I'm so sorry, goodness, so
we have
terrible.
Yeah, that one is like ideal.
This is the strangest setup I've ever. Everybody good? Yeah. Gotta wait a few seconds and continue. So like I mentioned, the mix of uses in addition to the imagery, actually what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna just camp here at the imagery and kind of use this as a place of discussion. So when we look at this actual place type, actually, I said I'm gonna look here, I'm actually gonna zoom out somewhere else. I'm gonna go to our place type map, so we can get an idea of where this place type exists. This is number 2, yes. So version 2 of our place type map, it's very kind of minimal in terms of where we see this neighborhood retail actually identified on the map. So I'm trying to find a few examples for you all. And the pink here, I don't think Reinhardt's part of the
No, that's identified as an industrial.
industrial.
Jim's club.
For the Wi-Fi?
The internet, yeah, for Wi-Fi.
I don't think
So
so.
Wi-Fi use Dell Surf. It's likely the best one.
No, that's for employees.
And you
Dell Surf.
City Hall also.
City Hall.
Okay.
Dell Surf's an open one, isn't it?
I'm on it. That could have been years ago. Someone gave me the password. But
No, Dell Surf's open.
Is it open now? Okay.
It's usually the best one I've noticed.
All right. So I'm gonna kind of jump into a few locations that we have for this neighborhood residential. I mean, neighborhood commercial. But I think you mentioned Greenville too was one of those. And sorry for the color being kind of close to the medium commercial. So we're looking at this more burnt orange that exists over here. This is also another location. If you can see my mouse, no, you can't.
That's over in Lakewood.
Right.
You're covering.
Going out toward this one too.
Yeah, and again, the colors on the map, they look very, very similar. So the neighborhood commercial and medium commercial end up looking off.
That's real close.
As is.
We'll be changing those colors.
Yeah, so it was one of the comments back that we had to stop creating so many place types because we ran out of colors. So, yeah. But yeah, for the neighborhood commercial, Lower Greenville is a pretty good example of a neighborhood commercial, right? It's linear in shape. There's not a lot of height over there except for a couple of occasions. But most of that's going to be 2 or 3 stories. They're not big square footage buildings either. They're smaller buildings. They're not that tall. It's a little bit more walkable in nature. So, if you're thinking of that area of Dallas, think about the difference between Lower Greenville and then when you go up to Upper Greenville, like the Old Town Shopping Center and Energy Plaza and those type of things. That starts to step up, bigger buildings, taller buildings, and bigger footprints.
But do you call that neighborhood retail? Or do you call that?
Mute yourself, I think.
That would be a different place type.
Maybe sound off.
I just turned it off.
Might be me.
In yet, so just technically.
Can we go back to Lower Greenville real quick and versus Upper Greenville so I can see the difference in color?
So unfortunately, Upper Greenville hasn't been labeled as a medium mixed use commercial district. But
Is it the speakers? Oh,
Sorry.
we're good. So, yeah, but that would be, so yeah, right now that's showing up not as a medium mixed use commercial district, but it should be labeled as such. That's the feedback that we've gotten from the community. That's how we describe the place types. Again, that neighborhood commercial. But another example might be if you're familiar with Garland Road, the stuff where like Smoky Rose, like right across from the Arboretum, some of that stuff is neighborhood commercial because again, it's not a lot of height. Those buildings aren't really big, and they're not like a huge, everybody from all of East Dallas drives there. It's more okay. It's only the smaller stuff that's there. There's some stuff in South Dallas along 2nd Avenue that would be the similar thing. Again, smaller structures, smaller parcels, not huge. And I know Lower Greenville is a bigger draw, but they're not intended to be stuff where everybody comes from a larger area. It's more that neighborhood is using those restaurants, that retail, those dry cleaners, those stores.
And one thing actually to take note of within all of these, the medium neighborhood and this iteration, a regional commercial. Actually, let's focus on the regional. Focus on the neighborhood and the medium. So look at the map. We're gonna wait for it to do this thing. Somebody else has a mic on. Testing. All right. So with the neighborhood commercial, retail, mixed use, there's kind of 2 ways we're looking at this, and our consultants are helping us think about this, and we'll want to get your feedback. So some of these neighborhoods that are, predominantly residential, depending on whatever scale, place type, it still has the ability to have retail, restaurants within that place type. That's not the predominant land use. So some areas are basically absorb that particular land use in that place. In some areas, though, where we kind of notice like certain nodes of commercial, either that being medium or neighborhood, either the community wants to focus on that node being a destination or a place that's different from their neighborhood. So then you kind of notice that these red dots kind of appearing on the map. That's kind of why those are appearing. And some of the neighborhoods that we've kind of gotten feedback from, they don't want that to be what they their place, like their neighborhood is embodying. So as we designate some of these, not all of them that has a neighborhood commercial or medium commercial on an intersection is codified in color, but some are. So I think as we look at it from a planning perspective, when we look at a map that has them, it helps us understand where those core nodes are, where destinations are, where the community or certain communities draw to. So I think from our perspective, that's one way of that being a very clear kind of reading of a map. On the other spectrum, also a good thing too, if that gets absorbed into a particular neighborhood, that place could be focused more on, you know, maintaining mixed uses, still kind of keeping that character, if it's traditional, blended, or whatnot with a residential feel. That's the type of place that community members might want to see too as well. So as we look at these two place types on the map, that's how we've kind of been planning on talking about them. Showing them on the map through either corridors or no just helps to emphasize their role and how they work within the neighborhood context.
So the red is what you're talking about.
Yeah, and really, you know, as Lawrence just mentioned, there may be nodes or commercial that's supporting a neighborhood, but it's not, you know, but it's part of that neighborhood versus, no, I'm going to this area and I call this hillside shopping. Okay, well, that's no longer supporting that neighborhood. That's a commercial district. That's a mixed use district. That's a place I'm going where it's no longer residential in nature, where it's more of that mixed use than that commercial. And again, the scale can change whether you're at, you know, Webb Chapel and Forest, and, you know, it's a smaller scale, it's more suburban in nature versus, you know, the difference between Deep Ellum, which is a mixed use area, versus going down Ross in Old East Dallas, where it's more of a residential area that does have some retail components there, but it's a little bit more of a part of that neighborhood.
So on the place type map as it exists right now, is there any proposed sort of expansion of this neighborhood commercial? Because, you know, one of the things that I hear is that when we get feedback from the public, they say, oh, we don't want our sort of adjacent commercial area to turn into Lower Greenville, but there aren't that many Lower Greenvilles in the city right now, so we're worried about, you know, Lower Green, and we hear from the folks on Lower Greenville that Lower Greenville's sort of overrun. So is there a thought of how do we create other context sensitive Lower Greenvilles to sort of disperse the pressure from that area?
Right. So I think, well, a few things I've heard, and Patrick can talk through what his experiences are. In the communities I've talked to, areas that are either adjacent to industrial, that's either probably changing or wants to change in the future. Those are some of the areas that have been kind of moving toward a more commercial mixed use to be able to absorb or provide an opportunity for a neighborhood who don't have that access to something like a Lower Greenville. So from my discussions, those areas that are actually, I guess, prime for development related to changing from a place type are some of these kind of pockets of flex industry, light industry that's either not working or is being asked to move to a certain direction from the community. That's what I've heard. I'm not sure what you've heard.
Yeah, I would say that, no, I attended several meetings, and some of the members of the public have been at those meetings where we sat down on Lower Greenville specifically and drawn a line to say, no, stop it here. Not just Lower Greenville, other areas over on Buckner as well. I mean, I brought up Second Avenue in South Dallas earlier, and that's an area where they said specifically that they want that. Like that's that road, Second Avenue, they want that type of development that's there. The current zoning does not match that idea, but it's part of this visioning of Forward Dallas where they said this is the vision for what we want, this neighborhood commercial that feels like Lower Greenville Avenue. Okay, so once we have that vision, we've labeled that as a place type, and then part of the work of Forward Dallas after it's adopted would be things going in and changing the zoning to match that vision for those areas. So we have had some of those conversations, and Lawrence, you know, mentioned a couple as well, where we have had communities say that's what we want.
And it sounds like there's, you know, some concern about moving up towards neighborhood commercial. You know, there's in parts of Dallas some moribund shopping centers that, you know, could be developed in a pretty dynamic way. Is there talk of sort of, in areas going from something more intense to a neighborhood commercial?
I haven't personally heard that. It's usually been this quarter is not working. We need more types of commercial uses that exist here to make this something that can thrive or that we can walk to. That's what I've heard. But I'm not saying that that's not a project that's happening, but in my experience within the city and engagement, it's been more how do we reinvigorate, make this better than what it currently is.
And there's a point that you brought up, but I also just want to challenge us to think as we're talking about this place type and then also others too about Dallas has had this really great problem of creating what we're calling nodes that then are just the nodes which creates those pressure points that you talk about. So I would say as we're talking about this, the challenge our thinking to not just having them being nodes, these points of activity, but how can we connect Lois Greenville? How can we make these neighborhoods really seamlessly blend into each other while still maintaining their identities? I'm thinking about cities like Chicago's Gold Coast, how that bleeds right into the Loop, and Denver, their Broadway, where it just connects neighborhood upon neighborhood, but you're able to know what neighborhood you're in, but you're having that growth of business, of residential. So the word node to me is just like, okay, you come here and then that's it. Whereas Dallas, if we're wanting to foster more sustainable growth, that these neighborhoods should really not be nodes, but more spreading out.
That's an awesome comment because we were actually talking with our consultant as we're looking at the kind of the urban design framework that we'll be presenting to you all in a few weeks from now. Is basically just doing that. So just having these nodes and corridors in and of themselves, just like islands, and not really stitching to like the fabric of a community or a place that exists. That's kind of defeats the purpose of looking at how these nodes and corridors work in a neighborhood and work throughout the entire city. So we're going to be adding another layer of information for you all to review that kind of shows how those nodes how these places kind of work with each other throughout the entire city of Dallas, because I think that's one piece that's missing. We have all these places to go, but how do they connect? How does economic development kind of go from one place of the city to the other, et cetera? So I think that's a huge piece that we hope to kind of get your feedback from. Also, too, we're going to be talking with our urban design peer review panel, who's kind of the experts with the urban design perspective to look at that too as well.
Okay, and I may have missed this from last meeting, but who was the consultant that we are working with?
Housel Levine, they're based in Chicago, and the sub-consultant Norris Design Group, they're based here in Dallas, and that's who's helping us with urban design.
So how do you accommodate for flexibility? Because what happens in some of these neighborhoods, like we're working on projects on Martha King Boulevard east of 75, and we're going to be building restaurants and some retail there, and it's going to start to become an attraction. So right now it's probably all neighborhood retail, but you get the hottest restaurant or a new concept in retail that draws people to an area. And is there any way to build in that flexibility that one inspires that kind of opportunity for a community, but also because one of the things that we've got in that neighborhood is there's outdated plans, and so it's not adapting to what's happening in the community.
Right. So that's actually we talked about this when we were looking at the initial kind of cluster, I guess, suite of place types. There was at the beginning like two or three place types looked very similar to each other. So, for example, neighborhood commercial and maybe the blended residential had a lot of overlap with supporting uses, but one is kind of focused on kind of maintaining neighborhood, and others focused on more commercial. And when you have those land uses that are similar within those, that's how we're thinking about that. It helps support that flexibility of how one maybe establishment growing and developing, maybe in one particular place type might be supporting use. That doesn't mean it's not. Doesn't mean it can't be there. But if it does become this thing that's I think a hot kind of item to go to, that could either be something that either gets changed to maybe a primary use, or the area maybe has a more neighborhood plan to focus on that type of establishment. Because, like you mentioned, like commercial, retail, that kind of changes with the times, whoever's there, whoever the audience is. So I think that flexibility in terms of keeping it in the supporting / primary use category, that's kind of how we're thinking about providing the opportunity. That's kind of all we can do is kind of provide the suite of tools and land uses and basically the place that exists and kind of use that as, you know, the context sees fit.
So this isn't immediate, but like down the road, entrepreneurs that are trying to create these special locations and special businesses,
Right.
you know, they can't afford to have to apply for a special use permit
Right.
to be able to operate. And so the cost associated really to do something different in what is traditionally a commercial corridor
Right.
is cost prohibitive for entrepreneurial, you know, startups, things like that. So that's, I mean, that's something, if we're thinking about economic development, we need to be thinking about the cost for startup businesses and what the zoning implications of that are and what the process is for all of that to allow for some flexibility. Maybe that's way off topic, but.
Well, I mean, so I would say the place types give that broad flexibility. And I know you mentioned one that's a bit more commercial in nature, but I'll talk to one that's a little bit more residential. Is over off of Ferguson Road, we had some planning meetings for Dallas where they said, okay, here are some churches. Okay, we want these to be, you know, either maybe blended or maybe a traditional residential, you know, and had the developer come in and propose an apartment building.
I'm
And
very
that's-
familiar.
That's a supporting land use in
Right.
that place type.
Mhm.
And so you say that's that flexible. Is it context sensitive? Okay, so it is. And again, they do have to go through a zoning change, but that's where you lay the groundwork to say, okay, if I'm a developer, if I'm an entrepreneur, I want to go to a place, I can check my place type map and I say, okay, this type of business is allowed here, this type of land use is allowed here, this type of development is allowed here. I can start to go ahead and pursue that.
Right.
You know, right now there isn't that guidance throughout Dallas. For the Pacific Development Code, that's something that Forward Dallas does make some recommendations on, as we do need to reevaluate our development code, very much so. It is very outdated. And maybe there are changes that we need to make overall in the neighborhood commercial place type where we say, okay, we need to change some underlying zoning in all of those areas to accommodate, you know, better entrepreneur practices while still, you know, maintaining the fabric of the community of the neighborhood.
Thank you.
There's one other kind of thought that came to mind. I'm going to wait for this to load for the public. Still. So going back to kind of developers, you know, coming in, or even community members, looking at these place types and how it's painted on this place type map. One thing we're trying to do from our perspective too is kind of help with predictability and clarity about where the development could or should occur, just looking at the map. So right now, you look at our zoning map, for example, half of the cities as a PD, there's no clear understanding about what those PDs are. Is that a residential PD? Is that a commercial PD? What is that? So what we're trying to do with this is also just paint a picture clearly about where are those places of, you know, commercial development, retail, et cetera, that could exist and that, you know, should exist based on the feedback that we're getting. And I think as we kind of use this as the first kind of pass for anybody trying to develop, you know, like you mentioned, retail or restaurants, this is kind of the first pass to understand how it's going to work together with the larger city. And also to going into the zoning perspective as you kind of delve into some of those, you know, barriers that exist. We hope that after this, you know, we're going to be starting that code update amendment process, actually reform process of our zoning code to hopefully touch on that concern you just mentioned too. Time check, even anything else on that one. Any other questions or kind of thoughts on the neighborhood commercial definitions, what it is, how we're defining it? All right, so our next place type to look at, medium commercial mixed use district. So again, the focus is also retail, commercial, just like our neighborhood, but in terms of the scale, it's a little bit different. The nodes and corridors are commonly located at intersections of major streets. Let me zoom into this, I'm sorry. The use, it serves a larger neighborhood and community. So it's more of the draw is a little bit wider in terms of who comes here. And the scale of building is a little bit bigger or a few stories taller than what we saw in the neighborhood commercial. When we look at the land uses that are supporting in primary, everything but agriculture, heavy industrial, utility are part of this suite of land uses. Light industry, again, going back to the clean type of land uses exist here. Lodging, mixed use, multifamily, office are primary, in addition to commercial and personal services. And an open space, public institution, and single family, attached and detached, those are supporting uses. So to get an idea of how this looks like or where we can see this in the city, we zoom into a few images here. If you know any examples, feel free to just jump in. This is an example of a kind of urban mixed use development. So, you know, the ground floor, suite of different commercial establishments, retail, restaurants, and above it could be apartments, condos in this area. As we move our way to other parts of the city that are more suburban in nature, this example kind of shows more suburban retail where there's a mix of different types of uses here, but it's more car centric, kind of just to kind of adapt to the type of kind of parcels and area that exists on the periphery of the city and some parts within the city too. And then lastly, just in terms of just giving another quick image recap of what this could include, multifamily. This one we're showing I believe this is a townhome development that we're showing here. So this is also part of the suite of uses that it could exist within this medium commercial mixed use district. Just like the one before, schools, parks, single family, religious buildings, neighborhood office are also part of supporting uses here. So let me zoom back to the first page. I guess first question for the group, just in terms of the mix of uses that exist here, just any issue in terms of the ones that are supporting primary, and kind of same conversation as before. Does it need to be a tweak with either imagery or initial descriptions that we had at the beginning?
I guess something that's throwing me off here is this inclusion of what we're calling suburban retail. So we're medium commercial mixed use. So the context and what mixed use, that's primarily like your high urban area. So then to have this, I'm going to pick on the image here for a little bit, but just like the connotation of suburban retail in medium commercial, it seems like that doesn't quite fit. And I guess maybe if you can go out like big picture. So we went through neighborhood commercial, we're at medium commercial, but then what are is there like another tier to this whole commercial mixed use so that I don't pick on this before, because maybe this suburban retail is not the right bucket for medium commercial to fit in.
And it's a little difficult just because of the unique nature of Dallas, where you have the Rust Belt city that then has a suburban city surrounding, and it's both the same city, right? And so we have these areas like Walnut and Preston. That's a pretty heavy commercial area, but it's more of a suburban, it's a power center, it's a shopping center, it's four corners with grocery store anchors and that type of stuff. And so we have that.
You're talking about Northwest Highway in Preston.
Preston Center?
Not Preston Center. I'm talking about where the central market is.
Oh, that's Royal.
Yeah, sorry,
Royal Lane.
excuse me, Royal and Preston. Yes, yeah, Royal and Preston.
Look, I was trying to go with this.
Wait a second.
I know
I
what
can
you're
tell you
talking
what
about.
it's on all the four corners in Walnut Hill and Preston, right?
Yes, but your same thing with like
Recently, we built shopping center.
Yeah, that's right.
Or like the casting in the shopping center as well, it's another example.
Right.
But then you also have stuff like Jefferson Boulevard, where you have the Jefferson Tower, right?
Mhm.
Where that's still that commercial area, right? And it's bigger than kind of a neighborhoody commercial place, but it's not, the third one that we're gonna get to that I'll spoil a little bit, the regional commercial, like it's not the Galleria and it's not Lower Greenville, it's here in that middle. But we have those middle areas that are older, right? You know, the more linear in nature, those strips, and then you have the power center commercials. And so it's a little bit of that difficulty that they're putting them together in the same place type because we have both of those place types. Just one is a little bit more of that core, that urban core nature, and one is more of that suburban belt that's around, you know, outside of Loop 12, basically.
Abrams and Mockingbird is a good example.
Yeah, Hillside Village is another good example of that you have. It's bigger than Lois Greenville, but it's not North Park. And it's okay, we've got that, and that's a medium commercial mixed use area. Again, it's also thinking about the future of those areas as well a little bit.
Right, and that's a good point with the the future of those areas. So I guess right now, let's say it is kind of this more suburban feel in nature, and to say we the population increase that we're getting, maybe it does transform to something that looks more, I guess, more urban, I guess, depending on how the city develops in the next 25 years, 50 years. That area designated within this bucket could still be kind of transformed into something with more mix of uses that's less horizontal, maybe more vertical, but but based on where it is now and its context to other parts and other cities that actually exist, it's kind of the flavor that we're looking at here is that more horizontal mix of uses. Now, and all of these three place types we're going to be looking at are the commercial mixed use. It's basically, like Patrick mentioned, it's like two major types of land uses. There's the commercial and the more mixed use, and we're kind of putting that in one place type. So there might be an area that's designated as this place type that's focused just on commercial, and another part of the city might be focused just on medium mixed use. There might be another part that might be more suburban in nature, and others might be more vertical in nature. That's within still this place type. I think the scale we're looking at too.
I get from a descriptive perspective that we need to include this suburban retail within at least, one of our place types. It may be very well that it fits within medium commercial. But from a prescriptive perspective, when people look, see something zone medium commercial going forward, I don't think this, example of suburban retail is ideal for what, it's very much stuck in the past. It's a lot of concrete, there's at least a little landscaping on that photograph. So when we enshrine this in some sort of document, is there a way to acknowledge that we have all the suburban retail, but that there may be new and better ways to think about suburban retail without,
Yeah, and when you get and it's not going to be perfect, but there is some of that thought process that's been put into you have medium commercial mixed use, but you have different design guidelines kind of for the two different types, the ones that are the suburban power center and the one that is more of a urban mixed use, and that you're going to have design guidelines for both of those. One is they're going to be different, and for those more suburban, medium, big square footage, big oceans of parking, how do you start to retrofit those to be forward thinking as opposed to set in 1980s?
Just one question I would just have too, whether it's amongst ourselves or for the consultants too, is like, what does the future of retail look like? Because if we're planning 20, 30 years out, then the Hillwood Village, there's space requirements. That's the answer I don't have, but what I'm hearing is that retail footprint is just getting smaller as an industry. So let's not plan for what we know retail to be today, because that is what we're seeing in this image here, what's typically around Dallas. That could very well be prime development for another use, well, mixed use, in the future. So just wanted at least target in on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and part of like, so instead of just calling it, we've been trying to, in our language and how we're describing some of these, instead of just saying it's medium commercial, it's medium commercial mixed use. And part of just labeling it as that mixed use says, okay, it's not residential, commercial. We're not just saying this is commercial, so you can go ahead and build retail, restaurants, and everything. That mixed use component to say it needs to have some more residential because, as you mentioned, the future of retail, smaller footprints. Like, we're not going to build more. Like, we're not going to add square footage of retail in Dallas. Like, it's just not. People smarter than us have been telling us this.
Right. And another planning conversation we have along those lines is if this commercial, if that's shrinking, that's probably there's an effect from that. So if that's shrinking, is warehouses, are they increasing in certain areas? What is the effect of that? If we're looking to kind of get more, I forgot the term. You basically go to Amazon and get your product shipped to you the same day delivery. It's coming from somewhere, and it needs to be close to wherever you're trying to get that to. So if retail is shrinking, something else is increasing. What's the effect of that in the city? So if it's thinking about like the effects and our cause and effect of these things too as well. I'm not saying we have an answer, but that's something that we're thinking about, is that something's going to have to move if that's shrinking to affect something else.
But you were saying to a point there, and just like the light industrial is included in this lineup, right? So okay, that's
Right.
where I mean, as
That's
you,
kind of,
yeah, that would be the space that's increasing. Is, okay, you got your distribution center, but then once you're in city, then where am I picking up my package?
Right,
Or
right.
where's the room telling me to do?
right.
So,
The Best Buy storefront has gone from 25,000 to 10,000, and then you've got the 10,000 square foot now. That's a smaller warehouse for them to do deliveries.
Right.
In terms of consistency and labeling, I noticed in the photographs here, it says multifamily, but then in the dot matrix above, it's got multifamily apartments.
Right. That's an older, good heads up. That is older text. That should be crossed out. So we're just going with multifamily. Thank you, Peter.
Sure.
Like a good teacher.
Right.
Can the folks online hear us? I haven't heard from any of y'all. It could just be that y'all are quiet. I just want to make sure that we're getting any feedback that y'all have.
Hear you. I mean, I have some comments whenever.
Okay. Well, feel free to hop in or save them for later, whatever you're comfortable.
Okay, well, I mean, I have a basic question about the name of the label here. I mean, I find, neighborhood commercial mixed use brings a picture to mind immediately. It's neighborhood serving. But when I look at medium commercial mixed use, it just doesn't tell me anything. So what exactly is medium referring to?
What is that, this meeting?
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Commissioner Carpenter. So that's, it's a good point. When we say neighborhood commercial mixed use, we say regional commercial mixed use. Sometimes those both can bring up, pictures in your head of different places. We've struggled a little bit to find that definition of the place that's neither one of those. We said it's somewhere in the middle, and so that was the medium, the middle commercial mixed use area. I mean, I'm 100% open to suggestions about how to better describe this area as a place type if there's something that can elicit, better elicit. Yeah, exactly. Better, we say it and you're like, okay, I get it, I understand it.
Well, is it referring to the area of the draw, like a Hillside Village,
Yes.
or is it the density, or is it the height? I just, what's the medium supposed to be referring to other than a placeholder for in between the
Yeah,
the
it's a little of both. So it's a little of both, but it's meant to be something that does draw people from more than just the neighborhood, but not this big regional draw. And again, it's meant to say that it is, the square footage and or the size of those buildings bigger than the neighborhood, but they're not super big like a regional area. So it's not, a 75,000 square foot Walmart. It's not a, the 20-story tall towers at the Galleria, but it's not, a 1,200 square foot dry cleaners with a a couple of other businesses that are there. It's somewhere in that middle or that medium that draws people in from the greater community, but also has a scale or a scope that's somewhere in that middle scale or scope.
Well,
So it's more like
if you're talking about retail, then it's pretty easy to categorize it. Like there's strip centers which are like 10,000 square feet, and that's what modern neighborhood retail would be.
Yeah.
And I think you'd be hard pressed to find a building over 10,000 square feet in most of these neighborhood areas. And then you're up to grocery anchored retail, which are much bigger because grocery stores are big and they have a lot of attended businesses around them. So it's a little bit without referencing like a square foot, because Lower Greenville is a big draw. It's a regional draw.
Right.
Yeah. And good people come out from all sorts of places, but the buildings are very small.
Right. Exactly.
So just trying to say what region does it pull from, and even what do the buildings look like? It's more of a function of the time of development and the parking, because there's not that much difference between Lower Greenville and a grocery anchored retail center, except that the parking lots were built second.
And I think on the screen too, they can kind of touch on that particular example is going to go to kind of Bob Bishop or Jefferson. Like the scale of the structures aren't anchor monoliths, but they have a regional draw, just because there might be a concept that's just really unique that everybody comes to. But I think the idea is to look at both the draw and the scale of the building, and I think also too how these place types relate to each other. So as you look at the map with all of those together, that kind of helps to understand, okay, this medium commercial, putting that in quotes, that's a little bit denser or more, has more land uses than a neighborhood commercial. So you can kind of understand what a particular part of the city is relative to another part of the city when you look at how they work together. So I think that medium, it's kind of touching on the scale, the draw, and all those together. But I think the idea is how do these place types work within this kind of suite of place types with each other? And that's kind of how we're hoping that it's kind of helping to inform how one place is different from the other two.
So Lawrence, maybe like to me, the neighborhood commercial is a little bit more descriptive than the word medium.
Medium, okay.
And so, maybe in terms of nomenclature, the consultants and you guys can work on some suggestions. I remember I was looking at my notes a couple of meetings back, the rural flex commercial. Maybe y'all could throw some proposals out and.
I mean, right in our current existing development code, you have neighborhood, community, and regional retail.
So community mixed use, community commercial mixed use, does that make better? That feel better?
I mean, it's a long word, but.
So the thing so what we heard too with that, so is a neighborhood not a community? Like,
Yeah,
is
that's my initial reaction.
So that's kind of what we've heard at the beginning. So is a community a smaller version of a neighborhood depending on where you are? So I think that
reference the greater community, right?
Right. So that's exactly. So I think that goes back to the conversation last time about the high, mid. Maybe that's maybe they all kind of just get broad swath, but I don't know.
And just from a reducing number of words, I think you can just skip to mixed use, because you're talking about mixed use, neighborhood, community, regional mixed use. That's that functionally different than.
You said again. So
if you just drop the word commercial and just said mixed use.
The neighborhood mixed use, community mixed use, regional mixed use.
Yes.
Because in essence, mixed use would capture commercial. Because
And it led to your point of we're getting away from saying this is just commercial.
Correct.
As in this is an area that's mixed use. Yeah. It's a good suggestion.
Quick question. Is there an opportunity to perhaps call it local as opposed to small, medium, or regional? Can you guys hear me? This is Jazz over here.
Can you repeat that, Commissioner Anderson?
I was wondering about the term local as opposed to medium, to kind of create the atmosphere of what we want to attract to the area or what we're preparing it for is kind of locally focused, smaller commercial businesses.
Right. And I think that goes back to the kind of conversation in terms of what is local. I think defining what local is that smaller than neighborhood? Is that a larger? I than medium. I think the term local also could lead to confusion as well. But I think that's you're actually helping us to kind of think about maybe this term medium just needs to be rethought about,
Right.
kind of provide more specificity, like Peter mentioned with the other place types that we have. So we can look into.
When you look at
that.
regional does not relate to
Right.
medium. It relates to a locale. So
Right.
if we're thinking of in those terms, local or even like Peter said, neighborhood, or I think those they ring loudly to those of us who aren't really well versed in the terms. So we could kind of understand, because people will have the same questions that Commissioner Carpenter had with what do you mean and how is that defined? So I mean I agree that it could be kind of better worded.
Okay. Peter, I know you mentioned, just want to make sure I got your comment. In terms of the nomenclature, done the same kind of thoughts. Just, is there anything specific that you want us to look at in terms of renaming of this particular place type? Or just kind of think along the lines of the.
No, I just had mentioned that came up in a previous meeting with the rural flex commercial, I think.
Right, okay.
And then I would just add too, just for the description of these districts too, since sounds like this is talking about catchment areas as far as like your neighborhood that's gonna, let's just say 1 mile radius. Let's, if we can define what these catchment areas are, or at least give a sense as to, okay, neighborhood that's gonna attract people within a 5 mile drive or X amount of miles, whereas your regional, okay, that's gonna capture people that are coming from an hour. So that way, that kind of gives people more scale as to, okay, population, what can this be in the daytime versus nighttime, who's actually living there, what kind of businesses will be attracted to develop in these areas.
Yeah, I think we put some thought into that. Sometimes there's a little bit of hesitation sometimes because some of the areas that we would label as neighborhood mixed use have pretty big reach. Bishop Arts, right? There's a lot of people that come in to Bishop Arts, but we don't want to label that a regional mixed use area because then that means that you go way up with it, and that's not what we're doing. So
Yeah, and it's this balance too. I think this future setting, want to think about what could the city look like, but also to that balance of we're in North Texas, we're by Frisco's, Plano's, etc. Very car dependent infrastructure, and thinking about what does that look like too with those players around us, and what are they doing in a regional perspective in terms of transportation. So those are all things that make a lot of sense, and we're kind of trying to find that balance. But that's a great point that you brought up. Like, does it make sense to kind of name it that way?
Well, I think
And just throw out another idea, maybe it's a district.
Okay.
Bishop Arts, Deep Ellum, Lower Greenville.
That's true.
I think it's
Someone online have a comment? Commissioner Carpenter?
yes. I'm sorry if I jumped in. I can't really see you in person to see who's talking or waving or anything like that. So I'm sorry if I interrupted someone. I think it's a little difficult, I think, in one word, whether it's neighborhood, medium, regional, to try to cover both the draw and the scale. Because Bishop Arts may be neighborhoods, or Greenville Avenue may be neighborhood scale development, but they're bigger draw. They draw from a bigger area than the immediate neighborhood. So I think there's a little tension there in trying to cover two aspects with one word.
From a zoning perspective, I think talking about scale might be more helpful, although that could just be my current way of thinking about from a zoning background. So
That makes sense. I think we're looking at it. I think scale is a huge piece of that. We also want to look at how they function for the most part, just kind of get an idea of, not just looking at the form, but how do they actually function So typically, for the most part, they have a more neighborhood or more a larger catchment area, like you mentioned. But that kind of broad stroking in terms of like that regional identification on these place type descriptions in the title doesn't play 100% of the time. So I think, as was mentioned, that maybe that identification of that draw just might be harder within this exercise that we're looking at. But that's something that we're still trying to understand to just get an idea of if we're identifying a particular area to be regional, like what does that do in terms of effects of transportation, et cetera, just to kind of plan for that too. That's a good point.
We have a hand up, Jasmine.
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you. So I'm wondering, do these titles or labels have any ramifications in terms of zoning when we began to declare various areas as mixed use or regional or commercial? Do they have any ramifications in the definitions of zoning that will make this difficult? Does that make any sense?
Yes, I think two things. They are meant to kind of define the vision of what the area is supposed to be, and that should inform if zoning gets updated or changed, which it's going to after this process. That should inform how that zoning classification gets either rewritten or defined. So the current zoning classification that exists now, again, these are more of kind of vision setting for those. So the current suite of zoning classification that we have, a few might not be in total alignment, but that's still the policing tool, is the zoning document that we have, or the zoning ordinance that we have. So this wouldn't be, I guess, hurting or limiting the zoning piece. It helps inform what zoning should be.
So turn into the definitions that we use when allocating a zoning designation to an area.
What was that last thing?
Allocated. So, Commissioner, so what I would say is this helps guide future decisions about zoning. So as an example, we've mentioned, scale and scope. The neighborhood mixed use district wouldn't intend to have the scope of 100,000 square foot building, retail building. And so if someone proposed that in a place that was labeled as the neighborhood mixed use district, you would say this isn't in line with that vision. Can you please explain why we need to move it? It doesn't have that vision. The design guidelines in Fort Dallas say X, Y, and Z, and X, Y, and Z don't talk about having 100,000 square foot retail, a big box there. So I guess that would be one example of how these place types in Fort Dallas would inform zoning and zoning decisions moving forward. Does that answer the question?
It does. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any questions online? Anything? Good. Okay. All right. Any other additions to the medium commercial? I think this was really good comments on this one. Oh yes. Right. It's gonna be put that down. Okay. Here's the door. I'll put it out. Alternative terms. Okay, so as we now look at previous conversation about the scale of these place types, the next, I guess, kind of a jump in scale is the regional commercial mixed use. So this one, let me wait for it to zoom in for the audience online. It's more for the major employment, major draws, shopping centers, the Galleria being an example of that. That's outside of the urban core. So downtown, the urban core, city center, that's its own place type. But the regional mixed use draws that are the highest outside of that would be within this place type. High rises, office towers, multifamily dwelling units, low to mid rise residential buildings are also in here. In terms of land use, everything is either supporting or primary besides agricultural, heavy industrial, and single family. Lodging, mixed use, and multifamily, and commercial being the primary land uses within this one. A few examples: the Galleria, like I mentioned before, the Cedars. I believe this is the Hill. I believe one of these.
Yeah, so that's going to be the Galleria, the Cedars. That's the Preston Hollow Village. Then the shops at Park Lane, McKinney Avenue, and some areas about town.
Okay. Keep this here for a second, and then I'm going to pan to our place type map. Just get an idea of where that exists.
Where would North Park be?
Here.
I just think Cedars and the Galleria and North Park just don't make sense to me as being the same category, but.
Yes, and again, it's back to this very first conversation when I was running with this that we had with the consultant was, we've got this stuff that's closer to the urban core, right, and we've got this other stuff that's out here, and we're calling them, whether it's the community, neighborhood, or regional, we're calling them the same place, but one is their forms are different.
Right.
And so having different design guidelines for the same place type, but based upon its form, having those be a little different. Because yes, walking through the Cedars and walking through North Park, there's a difference there, but they still have that big scope. And outside of downtown, they are the biggest mixed use districts that we have.
Right, and then also too, in terms of just maybe, might be other examples too, the period of development. So some might be fully built out, and the future place type is emblematic of what it currently is on the ground. Some areas it could potentially get to something that's more developer dense, like we just mentioned. So I think there's also a scale of at the time that the house developed within that place type. So I want to make sure that as we were showing this future place type, kind of that scale of how it can be developed or what it could look like if it were to be either denser or less. I want to kind of capture that in this place type too.
So Redbird would be in this category too.
Right.
Quick question along those lines. In trying to create a regional center, like Redbird, that might be in the UNT area, that might be, just in various areas of the South, how do we begin to influence that conversation to create a regional node with the assets?
Right.
An alternate
100%.
regional node.
No, 100%. It kind of goes to, I'm trying to actually pan to Southern Dallas, and it's pause on the screen here. But yes, I think when we're looking at those draws, the regional, those nodes too as well, just showing the kind of Redbird in this area, that's definitely the idea, is that there are areas in the city that aren't as mature from a regional commercial perspective, but from the community standpoint, from other stakeholders that would like to see that. So I think being able to identify that on this map, going back to, you mentioned too, UNT, kind of be another example. Some pockets there, just south of UNT, are labeled as regional and medium commercial. Sorry for the delay in the map. So that's the idea, is to start to kind of understand from a long-term perspective, what are the stakeholders wanting that to be, and then you just kind of mentioning too that we're looking to identify some portions of that based on feedback to also be regional.
And I've just got a thought here, where we're talking, this is kind of going back again to my, let's stop, or let's move away from these nodes. But I mean, this is just, I think it's a great opportunity. This is an example, but you've got this UNT campus, and you've got the redevelopment of Redbird, and then you've got Camp Wisdom connecting it. But then, and then again, this goes into other conversations about, okay, changing them, but that's what we're here for.
Right.
Why can't we then connect these two regional nodes by a medium or neighborhood along Camp Wisdom, and that way you're spreading that so that Redbird isn't at approaching point, and then so you've got that cross, I don't want to say collaboration, but this mix of these new nodes that are then feeding this whole strip of economic development in the southern sector, and then seeing that play out in other places.
Yeah, and this is actually, I'm familiar with this area. I'm kind of around here. community members will tell me, I guess neighbors say, well, I want to keep my neighborhood exactly how it is. Like, I see what you're saying in terms of connecting these major draws, but I don't want this to be Bishop Arts again, or there's a fear of that effect doing something else for them. And the feedback that we've gotten is to kind of keep certain areas a particular way. And then, like you mentioned, like along Camp Wisdom, that'd be a corridor to connect those two nodes. That could be a more of a, maybe a regional draw to not just the residents, but everybody else from Lancaster to DeSoto coming into this area. This balance between what does the community that lives here want and versus the future economic development draw. But I think that you make a lot of sense that connecting those nodal points with a corridor that kind of makes this work as one kind of entity. That's something that makes a lot of sense. And we're actually going to be showing you all kind of different versions of what that could look like from an urban design perspective as we start to kind of stitch and map those together. So from a place type perspective, that might not be something that we have on this version, but we're hoping to kind of show you all an updated version based on feedback about how to kind of clarify that, how that can work together.
Lawrence, from the community standpoint, Camp Wisdom is a link that we're considering the education corridor that begins to link Paul Quinn, UNT, the new educational suite that'll be at Redbird. It references Cedar Valley College, but the aim is to begin to pool resources in that area that support education and innovation while creating that node and corridor. The landowners north and south of Camp Wisdom, I would say East Camp Wisdom, with 35 being the demising line, are mostly greenfield landowners that would be interested in redeveloping the area that creates an attraction for the southern sector that then again links our potential nodes, and then even links it in reference to the transportation corridor and the inland port and all of those things that will happen south of 20. So we need some sort of receiver node to the southern sector that begins to capitalize on all of those efforts that will happen south of 20.
No, I think it makes sense. I think that both you and Joe, I think that the conversation about as we're looking to kind of create more economic development opportunities within southern Dallas, things identifying these corridors and how they connect and work. That's very helpful for us to think about.
Absolutely, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Carpenter.
Yes, how are you classifying the regional attraction of, say, a big box super center, Costco, Sam's Club, whatever? It's not exactly mixed use, but it's a huge regional draw. What category do those fall into?
Yeah, so Commissioner, once you start to get a couple of those big boxes there, that's where it goes to again, we're talking about the scale and the scope of those. That structure there, is 100,000 square feet, 75,000 square feet. Those end up being more of the regional commercial mixed use districts. Because again, they are very large structures. They take up a lot of property. And I know we don't want to talk about the draw, but like it's bigger than just the neighborhood. It's bigger than just, the grocery store, right? That can be a couple of grocery stores in each community, hopefully. But this is the big Costco. This is a big Walmart. This is the big Home Depot that's across the street from the big Best Buy and the other big boxes. So that, one big box is one thing, but then we have a clustering of big boxes that ends up being the regional place type. The example that Lawrence had on the screen earlier, down near Redbird, there are several big boxes there along 20 that we've called the regional commercial mixed use area as well.
Right. Excuse me. I think also looking at those big box retailers, one thing that our consultant mentioned too is right now, I guess currently, like it could still work as a regional kind of commercial, but in terms of the potential for what it could be in terms of development, it could develop into something that's more, again, vertical, depending on how many people get drawn or live there. It could be something like a Galleria, but in terms of the suite of, I guess, development scale, we're looking at from big box to something like the gallery kind of fitting in there, because they could redevelop to be something similar. If we become less car dependent, if we focus more on transit oriented development, if we have to go that way in terms of if we're getting 300,000 more people into the city, transportation is going to have to tweak differently and look different and tweak accordingly. So just providing the opportunity for that to happen within this place type is what our consultant kind of mentioned is a good way of approaching it.
No, I understand that from the regional draw point of view that, you know, the Galleria and a mega cluster of big boxes are the same thing. But from a zoning standpoint, I mean, for the pictures that you're showing here, I think if our minds are going Galleria, Cedars, that sort of thing, the big box is a cluster of big boxes is a totally different animal. I understand the redevelopment potential it could turn into this, but well, maybe you need to include in the pictures something that you know, is a regional, smaller scale as far as the built environment draw. You know, I just think it's going to be difficult for people to imagine the Galleria and a Costco as being the same place type.
Yeah, it is a good point, and I really hate to sound like a broken record, but again, we've got the Galleria and we've got the sea of big boxes in our city. So trying to figure out a way to have those be classified as the same thing, because there's two different, you know, scales in Dallas sometimes.
Right, because draw and scale don't move together.
Yeah.
How are you accommodating for large property sales that have occurred? Like Coke Global bought 270 acres close to UNT Dallas, and they're planning on doing an entire mixed use, big commercial, residential. Are we anticipating those uses in what we're doing now? Because it looks like when I look at the map, you've got it all single family residential.
Right. So I think the version that we have now, again, it's a few months old now. That was actually that development, a few other developments are looking at.
Right.
That's also like, hey, bring that in and analyze. Is this going to be more of a mixed use commercial? What scale of commercial should that fall under? We're definitely looking into those as well.
Because from what I like, it's the area that's over like UNT Dallas, it's the bigger area that's over here, right? Yeah, of labeling those areas, and we've had some conversations. I know Lawrence has had with some community members that are out there in that area to identify, you know, we still want to keep our single family neighborhoods. Right. Where can development go? And then understanding is that area. And I think we label it as city residential now, but it's probably a community mixed use district or a regional mixed use district, depending upon. And again, the flexibility within the place types is meant to allow you that flexibility, because again, it's not zoning where it's got to be 10 stories or it can't be 12 stories. It's saying, you know, are you doing a wrap or are you doing a stack? Right. Okay. So if you're going to be doing a stack, okay, that should be more regional. Right. If you're going to do a wrap, okay, that should be more the community mixed use stack.
But there's going to be but there's going to be a lot of big land holdings in play in the future, because that's our only opportunity for growth, frankly. Right. And so forward planning in terms of land use now, so that at least that's taken into consideration and gives the idea, and also makes the fight less. Mm-hmm. If you can get everyone to buy in, like these properties are in play and they're going to be converted and developed, and this is the whole goal of the city of Dallas, is build economic opportunities in Southern Dallas. What are we going to do in the place type world now to prepare for that in the future? Yeah. And I appreciate the fact that it's not zoning, but it's like what we're doing now. We're preparing we're making decisions that are going to impact land use in the future. And that's those big properties are all that greenfield that he was mentioning are all properties that are going to be opportunities for the city. Right. So
yeah, in addition to like having our meetings with the community, we do have, you know, either one-offs or calls with you know, either certain stakeholders and certain, like I'm going to be thinking about developing this in the future. What does that look like for Fort Dallas? So I think having that conversation is what we're also doing too, just to make sure we are capturing what the vision is for those landowners or the community would like, and kind of making sure that whatever investment is getting made in there makes sense for all bodies.
Okay, because I would hate to see us finish this process and maintain current land use when we know that's not going to be the case in the future.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
100%.
Thank you.
Another quick question. I want to kind of talk about what Commissioner Carpenter was saying about the Galleria versus Costco, and we do have these two regional types. And I think that we do have consultants on board. We pay them the big bucks, and we need to figure this thing out because that would be a point of contention for a lot of people. But then the second thing is the big box. How are we preparing for the remix of the big box stores that have been failing along our warehouse corridor or in the areas around, for instance, Redbird or UNT? What kinds of designations or thoughts can we put towards how to adaptively reuse those buildings and prepare for their redevelopment?
Yeah, and as we're working with our consultants, and thank you for the comment, Commissioner, we're taking a look at a lot of those big box locations and trying to understand, if it's a greenfield, here's design guidelines for how we redevelop a greenfield. If it's a redevelopment of a big box, because again, Ms. McMahon's point, they're both large acreages, right? Those big boxes sit on big sites. And so as those are redeveloped, what are those design guidelines that promote the redevelopment of those sites, and understanding that the greenfield and the redevelopment are going to be different, and that they're going to be different in the context, the different areas of Dallas is going to be different in those contexts, that the closer to the downtown or the design guidelines may be different than the ones that are further away from downtown and far north Dallas, closer to Redbird.
Even in those space types, it still differentiates, uses like the Galleria versus uses towards Costco's or Walmart's or big retailers or whatnot. So there is a difference in use. And I think that there's some efforts that can be taken to get to a difference in definition so that it's clear at the end of the day. Because I don't want us to get to the end of this also and have some ambiguity and how the city might grow, because we're growing rather swiftly. And I think that, great minds need to get in front of this so that we end up not having to just kind of reinflate the wheel, and we can create some new opportunities in our communities. But I know particularly around the Wheatland Road and 20 area, there are big box stores, and that area it has a lot of retail going on, but there still needs to be some thought towards what happens to the old Walmart, what happened to the old Costco that was there, what happens to these large boxes that currently take up a lot of space, but their zoning prohibits them from turning into an innovation center, for instance. I think that we can think about those things now in concert with the overall development of the city and begin to create some nodes or some opportunities here that may not be like the others in northern, eastern, or western Dallas.
I agree. I think that mentioning these design guidelines and goals is going to help us bridge between existing and the future, right? And future opportunities. So those goals and design guidelines just seem to me to be super important for this document and this group. The other thing, just wanted to jump into back to nomenclature real quick. At the top, bold letters and regional commercial mixed use. I think it's shopping destinations. So to me, I'm wondering if we can have more descriptors or less, but just to focus on shopping seems to me to, eliminate art like at the Cedars or entertainment. Shopping, if we're going to go there, we should probably add more or just say destinations.
That's so core to Dallas's identity.
Shop and eat.
Well, we can still have shopping. I'm not saying don't go there, but we can also look at art.
Yeah.
Go to a pocket library and.
And Lawrence, you know, I know that this is not, you know, a transportation planning document per se, but the importance of transportation and the nodes that they represent in terms of a transportation hub for our citizens is critically important, needs to be kind of noted on here, because some way we have to maybe connect them in some way, or at least visualize them as being employment hubs for people.
Right.
And the critical important nature of transportation, and kind of realizing that these hubs exist, job centers, and getting people from neighborhoods to these areas is critical.
No, 100%. And kind of touching on like my core also is transportation planning before I got to the city. Transportation and land use, they're tied to the hip. And one thing we're doing, we're going to be showing you all this, and then I guess 2 meetings from now, is that urban design framework plan, which not just shows how the land uses work together from a nodal corridor perspective, but we're identifying the complete street designations, have, you know, the different types of complete streets, commercial, et cetera, and how they tie into these land uses. We don't have this here at this particular juncture. We want to define these terms first. We're going to come to you all and kind of show you all how those are kind of tying the land use component and transportation to hopefully help to go to what you just said, tying the land use and transportation together.
Say, first of all, you just walked into my head and said that thought out loud, but part is, yes, transportation is something that we need to be heavily thinking about with this, but also thinking, if we're looking, this is 20, 30 years, we're building this land uses for millennials, Gen Z, and I just heard the other night Gen Alpha or Gen, wherever
It's a new one?
yeah, there's the 6-year-olds out there now. So if we're now seeing that, I would rather, and I hear high schoolers would rather Uber to a friend's place. So this is who,
yeah,
right? Which I'm like, well, geez, you know, I thought getting a driver's license was all the fun of being 16. But I mean, it would be great to see what the, I guess, any plans or overlays for not only the DART extension, but I know like there's conversations about extending the streetcar network. What does that look like in, you know, on Camp Wisdom or on Greenville? Because that's something that can then help inform how we're tying these together. So if there's a map, the only one that I know to reference right now is like the extension of the downtown street car network. But if there's more in planning, or if that's something that can be a part, that should definitely be a part of this conversation too, so that we can see, okay, yes, we've got our existing DART stations, but then how are you connecting on that scale below, which I call, you know, your streetcars to these mixed use districts.
And I would even take it the next step there and consider, you know, in addition to DART and streetcars, the cycling and walking trails, right?
Yes,
That's
yes.
what we want to encourage.
Yeah, yeah.
And also the
And then
5
parking
Mile
becomes
Creek
a big
master
issue as well.
plan.
Okay, you repeat that, Commissioner Anderson?
I was saying also the 5 Mile Creek master plan and the park plans that we have, to begin to connect those all together with this overall plan so that it all is comprehensive.
Right. You all are taking like the fun of the surprise for when we do come to you all. So I think what we wanted to show in that so basically all the feedback that we're getting to, we're kind of starting to parse it into like the place types and land use, and then also to having like another layer of information, calling it the urban design framework layer, that kind of shows how the parks, trails, transportation, how that works together to help supplement and support those land uses. So all the feedback that we're getting here, if it's not tied to the place type or land use, which is the core of what this is, we'll be showing indications of that in another layer of information that we'll be getting your feedback from in the next few weeks. So
And I'll also add, when we talk about the implementation plan, some of these issues are more structural, like with transportation planning and land use planning in general, we're recommending greater alignment just process wise. So that's why we'll come back to you with some suggestions and how we want to approach that from a process standpoint and get some greater feedback. How can we greater align the thoroughfare plan with the land use plan? How can we better work with DART and our transportation planners? So we'll come to you with some of those ideas as well.
Right.
DART success depends on this plan.
Exactly right. I think, yeah, like you just mentioned, Colin, like DART success does depend heavily on like the proper land use planning too. And vice versa. I think when you do transportation planning without understanding that, or the opposite, either fails. So I think it's important to make sure we are coordinating. Good point.
Thanks for that.
All right. So the time check is 10:20. We usually try to go to 10:30, so this might go to 10:45-ish. Is that okay with last conversation? Okay, cool deal. Okay, perfect. So make sure we still get quorum. With this last conversation in the city center, urban core downtown, because the term and the name can morph and change too. Let me zoom in actually for those reading. So this is the densest and concentrated regional job kind of node and center that we have in the city. It's pedestrian oriented, mixed use development, and offers a lot of transportation options. Also civic and open spaces offer activities throughout the year. Throughout the year, daytime and evening time as well. Land uses that are primary here are lodging, mixed use, multifamily, office, commercial. This shouldn't be here. Single family attached. We can work on that. This is why we do this, so we kind of catch this.
So one quick question with a single family attached. Like I know near the farmer's market, there are some townhomes. Is that not something that we want to?
So as a primary, I think.
Oh, secondary. Okay, perfect.
Right. So I think the thing is, the idea that I was probably here. So there's going to be some peripheral and some sprinkling of some of these land uses, but the predominant land use it shouldn't be single family attached, and transportation as well. So let me zoom to kind of show some imagery.
Sorry, right before we leave that session. So then, you've got multifamily apartments as one word, but then I'm also thinking your condominium owners. So can we break that out so that you?
So what we actually, apartments shouldn't be here. It should just be multifamily.
Okay.
This is also an error. Thank you for catching that. I think all these place type slides should remove apartments from it. We'll change both translations too.
And Lawrence, how, I could see where public open space and public and institutional facilities might be somewhere between primary and supporting, but are they, it seems like those might be primary.
Right, and that's, maybe open for conversation. We can kind of talk through that, in all the places that we have, all the place types, the open spaces, the regional open space, probably the core place type that does have this as being the primary. We don't go to some of these other place types just for that particular type of land use, but that could be something we can kind of talk through now, because right now we're thinking it's supporting these other activities, it's the mix of uses, but
I would argue that public open space, that I'd go to City Hall, I'd go to Clybourne Park, that's like our Central Park.
And the way that I would describe it is, so in the residential place types, right, we have, these are supporting land uses, a park or a school or a religious building. Those are supporting, those are an integral part of that neighborhood. Just like Clive Warren is an integral part of the city core, but it's not the main thing that is happening in the city core. It's supporting everything that's around here. So City Hall, right? We don't want the city core to be to have just a bunch of government facilities. They should be there, but they should be that supporting thing that supports what that neighborhood is, which is, office buildings, apartment buildings, mixed use buildings, retail, restaurants, those things. Those are the primary things that are happening in this city core.
I hear you, but then where would the primary use for government facilities be?
Right.
So, and again, at the end of the day, we say this is a primary use. I don't think there's anything that's wrong with that. But I don't know if government facilities is the primary use in anywhere. I think it supports different areas of our city. And so even though we have City Hall down here, and we have the courthouse down here, and we have the county buildings down here, and we have a higher clustering of government buildings down here, I don't know if that's the main thing we want for all of it. Like, you know, DDI will talk about how they have their, you know, little pockets of neighborhoods, and then we've got get what we call this area here, but they identify it as the more government center because that's what's over here. But as the big area, right, and we're talking about downtown, uptown, this core, that government buildings are supporting it, but it's not the main thing. It's not the primary thing that should be.
And I feel like this is kind of conversation we have outside here. Like even we might not even agree with that too. I think like you're kind of pushing like why can't it be? Like why can't public space be a primary space, that land use that we see in the city core? And that also be something that we look at for public institutional facilities, or we're looking specific to like federal buildings or governmental buildings. Like why can't it be something that we kind of like focus on? So I'm not saying that is it right or wrong, but I think with the public open space, that makes a lot of sense. Like why can't it be a piece that we're looking at, especially when we're thinking about like the urban agricultural plan, and thinking about how to rethink urban ag in the city. Like why can't it be something that everybody has access to, and it should be like a right in a sense. So I do like kind of where you're going and talking about, and I don't have an answer, but I think we can probably continue that too with our consultant and our team, because I think that's a great point to think about. Like why can't it be a public primary use?
And yeah, I see where I understand the rationale. It makes perfect sense. But you know, knowing that 20 years from now, with the transformations in Harold Simmons Park, the Trinity River Corridor, the Dallas Water Commons, that those are hopefully really going to change our city at its core. And those are like critical, I would argue, public open spaces that will be a magnet for all neighborhoods, all communities in the entire region.
Right, thinking like a Central Park for Dallas, like that's the core node, I guess, within that area. There'd be a spine here. So that's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, it is a good point, because, you know, when you talk about Manhattan, people mention the things that are in Manhattan.
Right.
Talk about Central Park. Right. That's the thing.
For sure.
Right. So, you know, yeah, it is a good point. Right.
Well, quick question. In our community conversations, we often talk about promoting a decentralized government so that we could get neighborhood city halls or some kind of services out into our communities. A lot of our residents don't go to the urban core. So the notion of government buildings being downtown, I don't know if government is a use, but public and institutional, I agree with. I think that kind of works. But I also agree with Lawrence in that focusing on open space for the most, the densest area in the city, which is the downtown core, I think is a great primary use. Considering how dense it is downtown. But I do want to promote decentralized government so that our communities can have an opportunity at some of those services.
I think we've talked our way into saying open spaces.
Yes.
Government, basically.
So let's go and look at some imagery, just to kind of get a flavor of what this place type is. So we have a view from City Hall looking out to downtown. Some of the similar images that we actually saw in previous place types, you know, there's going to be some blending from the core to the edge of those other place types that exist, Arts District, and other type of facilities. So I think when we're looking at this is the densest location that we have in the city. And what's unique about this place type is that looking regionally, this is probably one of the most unique place types that exists that draws people from other cities to come here. So I know other cities are trying to create their own places and not be dependent to go to, you know, a Dallas or whatnot. But this is something that's very unique that us, you know, Fort Worth has this as well, is this dense, high rise type of structure environment that you can get a lot of uses and activities within walking distance, and it's just a more regional draw too as well. So I want to also put that too here, and one conversation we were having is, where does this end? Where does that kind of, what is city center? What is a core? Especially with, 345 and the conversations about what the future looks like for that. Sorry for going all over the place here. So our conversation is more about the definitions and not focused on just the where, but I want to kind of bring this map to the picture and let it load for those online.
And sorry, while this is loading here, I would just, this is a little kind of picky here, but the picture of City Place, I would argue, is probably not the best example of city center, just because literally that building is in its own little granite island right off of Haskell. So for anyone that knows that building, it's probably not the best testament to like, okay, this is the hub of human activity in Dallas, Texas.
Right. Yeah. And then actually that's a good point too, because going back to, for example, parts of Cedars, is that downtown? Like, so people are trying to understand, like, what is downtown? Like, how do we now start to kind of figure out and cap or grow what this core is? So I do appreciate you bringing that up, because that's conversations we've had. Should that be something that's its own thing that gets kind of morphed into another place type? Is it part of downtown, the city center? Your thoughts on that? I'm curious.
Oh, on the City Place area?
Yeah.
Well, there's, I'm glad you asked, because I started a neighborhood association right there. So there's, there is the central development, which right now the streetlights, they're bringing up their phase 1 tower. So that whole area, so City Place Tower, City Place Market, and then across the street from Haskell, which you can see is like that little blue outcropping. That would be, again, it's another node, which, how much I feel about that, but I would say when it's fully built out, that is going to be its own. If we had to categorize it by this, it'd be one of those like regional mixed use that I can see it being an anchor, but it's not connected to downtown other through the DART station that's at City Place.
Are you familiar with the unique history of that building?
I knew it used to be the 7-Eleven Southland Corporation.
So they were going to build one, and the other side of the freeway, they're going to build the other one, and then this great skyway was going to be the welcome gate to Dallas.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Didn't happen, so.
And that's another thing that we'll touch on too, is kind of gateways to different parts of the city. So you have these land uses, you have nodes and cores. Like, when people get to these, like what are those entry points to a particular district and place? And the idea is to hopefully kind of put all those together, so we have an understanding about like what is a place trying to do in terms of where it's bringing people from, gateways, landmarks, etc. So that's all part of that urban design kind of conversation we'll have with one of these meetings, and kind of hopefully tie in a lot of this conversation too.
So Lawrence, we're jumping all in front of you and everything, but when you pop that map up there, I think I noticed that the urban core inside the highways was clearly dark blue.
Right.
And then it spread over to Uptown and beautifully connected by Clive Warren Park. And so then, if we're going to go that way to the north, then wouldn't the new deck park to the south make the Cedars want to be?
Right. So we're actually
the density seems kind of similar.
Right. We've actually been talking about that too internally. I think the dark blue actually might get refined. And we're trying to talk with our consultant, community members, in terms of what that place is. Do they want to be part of downtown? I think when it was initially codified by our consultant, I think it kind of went a little bit too broad in terms of that location. But we wanted just to make sure that, like you mentioned, like within like the loop of downtown, that's pretty clearly defined. And when we go across Clyde Warren, that's also pretty defined too. But what is that other area going up further north along 75? What is that actual supposed to be or want to be? And I think that we're in a conversation about, playing with that place type. It's kind of in flux right now, to be honest. And we're going to be analyzing those in the next month or so.
Yeah. I mean, it's, and I think it's not a conversation to have now because we've all been talking for 2 hours, and I think we're a little bit spent out. But, one of the questions I would ask y'all to have some thought about is, what is that urban core, right? We all, as Lawrence mentioned, like inside the freeways, okay, we get it, but how far does that go into Uptown? How far does that go into Deep Ellum? How far does that go into the Cedars? how far does that go into Oaklawn? Where are those boundaries?
Right.
You know, sometimes they're a little bit more natural, sometimes they're not. So having those conversations and thinking of those things, and as you're, you know, living your lives throughout the next couple of weeks, like you're riding your bike through development. Okay, well, is this the same as riding my bike through Main Street downtown? Okay, well, it's not. Okay, what is, you know, taking the trolley, you know, walking across Clyde? Okay, it still feels the same. Like we go into the Cedars, those different areas, like what do they feel like? What should they be? And look forward to hearing some feedback eventually on that again.
Right.
Just as a reminder, North Dallas High School used to be exactly that.
Yeah, my grandmother went to North Dallas High School and lived on a farm near left field.
Right.
That was North Dallas.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that really comes to mind is just density restrictions and height restrictions. They're not the same in, you know, hardcore downtown versus the uptown area. So just kind of something to keep in mind. I don't think we need we gotta like think beyond the four corners of the freeway parameters that we traditionally think of downtown. But the height restrictions, density restrictions are going to be different on the north side versus the south side of the center, the community center here. So just something to think about, because they're different.
Yeah.
Let's face it, they're different. And so to group it all together, you can't brush it all with one stroke here. But density is a big issue within what I call the north side and the south side, right, the city center.
Yeah, and much of the points earlier about the age of when those areas developed, you know, the glass skyscrapers are in downtown.
Right.
You know, those aren't glass skyscrapers. Those buildings are different, you know, built differently with different requirements, different ages.
Commissioner Anderson, did you have something? I thought I heard you.
I do. So in the conversation talking about from the city core, I guess going up towards Lemon and how that freeway and all of that kind of worked out, it jogged my memory about, do we have anything that we're doing that references historic areas or areas that we might need to preserve or pay some attention to? I'm just kind of thinking about how the freeway came in and they had to move the Freedmen's cemetery, and how they're doing a lot of areas around. Is this the appropriate audience to begin to talk about historic districts or preservation or anything like that?
Yes, actually. So although this is a zoning kind of exercise or tool, that urban design framework is also going to include historic and conservation districts. So you can, as basically, you know, areas in the city that are either being kind of kept or preserved or uniquely identified on this particular place type plan. So that's also going to be another layer of information that we talk through when we go through our urban design framework map.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And we are past 10:30. Any thoughts, conversations, questions that I might have missed, or last remarks before we get to one other item I wanted to talk about with scheduling before we?
I would just say, I think this was your first point about city center urban core. I would advocate for strongly, at least referencing downtown as city center as opposed to like a central business district, because it's within encapsulate to all people, that all are welcome. It's not just business, it's not just residents, but really is the center. And I was kind of just debating here, it's like, well, should it be the CBD? Because other cities around the world call themselves that. But if we're truly trying to be this new dynamic and looking into the future, downtown should just be more than high rises with corporations in them.
It's a neighborhood.
Exactly.
Jennifer's got an opinion.
Sorry, I kept trying to get in. No, I definitely want to emphasize that we're more than just a concentrated regional commercial center. And the biggest growth actually is going to be in residences. And, you know, one of our goals for all of downtown is to build a complete neighborhood. So things like schools, things like retail and services that feel more like some of those commercial mixed use areas we were talking about earlier, you know, at ground floor retail. And I just can't stress enough, to me, the difference in a lot of what we've talked about, even when City Place, I'm sorry, it's hard for me to follow on the stickies digitally, but it comes down to mobility. And, you know, I think this is one of the most multimodal parts in the entire city, true multimodal, that you can park once and scooter, dart, bus, or train, and certainly pedestrian or bike. And it's kind of mentioned, but I feel like really stressing that that's because it's really hard. Actually, cars are, I think, almost a disadvantage in this type. So anyway, for what it's worth, thank y'all.
No, thank you.
Speaking of mobility, you had a great scooter interview the other day, Jennifer.
Thank you. People are behaving a little bit better, so may it continue.
And then one more, look, and then I promise I'm gonna shut up on this.
Okay.
But for references to, and I know that we're capturing, okay, what's here in our area so that the public can identify, like, yes, I know West Village.
Right.
But I would say as far as like a great example of a city center in Texas would be Austin. And then also, at least how we should be thinking about this too, is like, how can Dallas in our land use planning be competitive to our suburban counterparts? So Austin, where, you know, they've got all, you know, it's multi-generational, multimodal, but it's completely walkable, and the businesses within, I'm thinking off of Congress going out either way, that they really have done a great job as far as making development. And of course, policies, that's, you know, part of how they've been able to grow too, but just at least thinking of that as an example that most people know how their growth in their urban center is growing.
Awesome.
Yeah, and we really need to discourage these large swaths of parking lots. Like, they gotta go away in our city center. So whatever language you need to get rid of large parking, I mean, they're you know, organically going away.
Right.
Yeah. But let's discourage.
That's actually the parking lot, the parking reform is actually a thing that's getting kicked up now within the planning. Now that we've had more staff, we're having more coordination in terms of what they're doing with what we're doing here, just a good point.
And that's become a real hot issue with council members.
Right.
Already said. We're getting activated.
You're right. Kill them. I see all these parking lots.
All right, cool deal. Thank you all for this awesome conversation. One other point I wanted to mention is just kind of a general kind of tentative schedule. We'll touch base with you all through email just to confirm a few things. So the next half of the year will be scheduled. Hopefully we're going to be scheduling that for you all, just kind of understand what we're going to be doing with CLUP for Dallas and other planning initiatives coming through. One that comes to mind, South Dallas Fair Park. That's an area plan that's being developed. So I just want you all to kind of get prepared for seeing that within this body as well. And we want to make sure that those two plans for Dallas and South Dallas Fair Park kind of coincide with each other. So we'll try to kind of keep those in line as much as we can. So what we want to do, the next meeting we have, we're going to be touching base. I think that's an implementation conversation that Brian will be leading, kind of talking about the different kind of implementation buckets through our themes, how we're looking through implementing some of these ideas in ways that's actually tangible, and getting your feedback in terms of what can we do, what should we do to implement some of these themes or get some of these place types or just conversations about how we should move from kind of visioning to reality with Florida Dallas. I'm going to get your feedback with that. And then the subsequent meeting, I believe, is going to be a discussion about our urban design framework plan. So we'll be sending you all information beforehand to review. Apologies again for sending stuff a little bit later. This time you'll be getting a lot more information in terms of a lot more of the defined, redefined place types to review and send back to us. You'll be getting snippets of the urban design framework as we flesh that out, and also to the implementation kind of plan that Brian's helping to develop from his team. So as we move into the summertime, like we mentioned, we're kind of focusing our staff's efforts in terms of writing the plan. So we haven't scheduled in-person meetings with the public, but we're still welcoming feedback and calls and discussions with them during this time. So we can kind of collect all the feedback that we've heard, analyze it, put it in a document that's comprehensive, and then present that back to you all around end of July-ish. And we hope to, from the conversations we have here, you basically get kind of pieces of the plan. We'll show you all the entire plan close to end of July, mid-July, and then hopefully have a conversation about what does that look like in terms of sending recommendations to CLUP and that kind of passing on the baton to the next body that will be engaging with this plan, and then hopefully moving that forward to council later in the fall. And depending what happens, that might get kind of pushed to beginning of next year too. But the idea is to have you all kind of help kind of guide and craft this plan through the summer times, get it to a point that's pretty you're pretty comfortable with for CPC. You all will still be welcome to kind of be part of those conversations and that progress. But we want to just kind of give you a general picture of where we're kind of seeing you all with this work with Fort Dallas. South Dallas Park will probably be coming along behind us, and after we present the urban design framework implementation plan, you'll be seeing a lot of their work too as well, and we'll be briefing you all either through email about what to expect coming up too as well. So we'll be scheduling and having emails about scheduling, in the next few days, just to kind of confirm the next 6 months of planning work, and also too, we might have a month between now and end of December for a recess. I don't think you all had a recess in terms of this entire year, or actually going back to next year. So we'll talk through that. I'll reach out to each person to see availability. That might not be necessary, just to make sure we're jiving with people's schedules. Anything from your end, Brian, too, from I think cover implementation place type wise that might be good to talk through. We're also having one-on-one conversations with CPC members, council members on the place type map. So after these conversations, we actually have a few meetings with a few members, just kind of go up the map and kind of just draw and talk through their particular issues in their area. So by the time we get to hopefully end of July, we have a comprehensive place type map that hopefully covers a lot of the feedback that we've heard so far.
Can I ask a couple of scheduling, not scheduling questions,
Yeah.
but kind of forecast
Yes,
questions?
definitely.
So with council being out in July, how are you are you going to be able to get those meetings in before the end of
So
June?
those are actually happening now. So we'll touch every council member, but maybe one or two before the end of June. So we'll have a few here and there that we'll coordinate. And
your brand new council members, how
Yes.
are going to handle that?
Yeah, we're ready to touch base with the current council member, and he's going to be exactly briefing the current ones, or the ones that are in that pot. Letting them know what could be coming up with that.
When do you anticipate all the public comment to be closed?
So in terms of that's a good point. So right now we are analyzing all those comments. So social pinpoint, we're going to be kind of putting a pause, or basically it's still going to be live, but we're analyzing it right now. So this is the time that we're actually taking time to inventory and review. We're not doing any public engagement, but we are kind of open to any feedback. If somebody comes to us and says, hey, we haven't heard of Fort Dallas, this is what we want to kind of see there, we're still open to that. But right now we're kind of focusing on just analyzing what we have so far, which is basically a year of engagement.
So you anticipate basically that the public engagement is over, or public comment is over?
No.
Is it the end of- I mean, it's before CPC. I mean, I'm
Okay, so sorry. So
trying to get timing, because I mean,
okay, so yeah.
probably from our membership, we probably need to do something more intense than what we've done so far.
Yes, so so I can maybe talk through each month at a time. Is that it's still tentative? We're still confirming with the council's office, city manager's office, just to make sure that their schedule looks is jives pretty well. So internally, PUD staff, we are analyzing all the feedback so far right now. So we're still getting engagement comments here and there, but the focus is writing the plan. Come August, September, that's going to be our technical 60-day public comment period.
Okay.
So we want to have the feedback from you all, council members, city manager's office, consultant, all kind of packaged by the end of July. So we have something to say, okay, technically, this is the 60-day comment period. Please go review the plan and all elements of the plan. So right now, still feedback can happen here and there, but we want to make sure we get like a consolidated kind of package first. And then we're going to be presenting that to you all first, and then to the public in August. Once we get to August, that's probably going to be when the handoff happens between you and CPC. When the public starts to review those plans, hopefully CPC will also be engaged about the feedback that we've heard so far. any questions that they might have in terms of implementation, kind of moving towards them. They might be thinking more about zoning and how that applies. That'll be those conversations. And we'll be having briefings with council as well, just to let them know the updates of the plan moving toward end of the year.
Yeah, and as this new iteration of the map, like once it's completed, I think that's a good opportunity to have re-engagement with some of the folks that you may be familiar with, because that's a little bit more, the rubber is starting to hit the road. Like that's a little bit more, if you know, if this is your neighborhood, if this is property that you own, it's stuff that you manage, right, stuff you have an interest in, here's what that place type is, and here's the implementations for that in the next 10, 20 years.
Right, and engagement, like I mentioned, is going to continue throughout the entire of the process. When we get to around August, September, we're actually going to be we're thinking about strategies of re-engaging the public a little bit more, I guess, forcefully. So it's going to be 3 different kind of buckets of engagement. The online kind of tool is going to be more of a virtual workshop to kind of just go in, look at the map, just like we've been doing on Social Pinpoint, but also there might be videos. And also just like online ways of providing surveys and responses to certain parts of the plan. That's one piece. We're going to have in-person open houses throughout the city, just to kind of cover the different either districts, planning districts that we have in the city. But the focus that we're going to be looking at are low engagement areas. So areas that probably haven't even heard of Fort Dallas still. We're going to be going kind of directly to them. We're kind of developing a PUD on the move, Fort Dallas on the move, where we kind of just drive to a particular location, have a pop-up tactical urbanism type of setup, and just kind of talk about land use and place types and what that means in their community. That's how we're going to be kind of using that 60-day period to kind of promote the word of Fort Dallas.
Do you anticipate it going to council for final approval at the end of this year?
The plan, the project scope is always end of the year, but we also always know that things happen that might push it to next year. But the idea, that's our kind of goal, is to try to have something for them to review and look at end of the year. But we know there are a few other things that are floating around in the city that might take precedent depending on, you know, what's happening with budget, et cetera. But our aim is to have something to them by end of the year, beginning next year. Yeah.
Quick question.
Yes, sir.
And this is just to end it. Where would I have the opportunity to talk about transforming 5 Mile Creek into an economic core, kind of like the Riverwalk? We don't have to answer that now, but that's the kind of conversation that I'm trying to get into.
Okay, I can touch on that too, and then we'll probably have a conversation about that when we kind of have a in-depth review of their map. So in addition to just looking at place types, having conversations with CPC members, club members, council, in terms of identifying certain focus areas that could be looked at from either economic development perspective, connectivity perspective, all the themes that we have focus areas for those. I think that could fall within one of those to kind of talk about, you know, we can identify or talk about it within Fort Dallas and think about what does that mean for the future in terms of a neighborhood plan or other type of plan or initiative that should be looked at from a policy standpoint.
And I'll just add that city staff working on Fort Dallas are very generous with their time, always happy to set up a meeting to discuss, you know, particular topics, particular areas that you feel like, you know, need more attention. So, you know, if there are areas like 5 Mile Creek or other areas that you really think deserve some particular focus, you know, I would reach out to Mr. Gu, Mr. Price, and figure out, you know, a time to set up a meeting to really dig in. You know, we've got a lot to cover at these meetings, and it's great that we're diving into all these different areas. But if you feel like something needs extra attention, always consider city staff as a great resource on how to, you know, dive in and provide some additional feedback there.
Thank you. So that's all I think we have from city staff. So pass the baton back to you.
Great. Can I get a motion to approve our May 23rd minutes?
So moved.
I have one.
Oh, yes.
There's one error. Jennifer Scripps is listed as absent, and she was present.
Okay.
She was present. She was cold.
She was cold.
Okay. All right. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
So
Great. Thank you, Mr. McMahon.
Joe Cannon, second.
Oh, great. Second from Mr. Cannon. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nay, the motion carries. All right. It is 10:55 a.m. and this meeting of the Comprehensive Land Use Plan Committee is adjourned. Thank you.
all.
So much.